Well, Yvonne, there were two hostages, two elderly Israeli women who were released overnight, and one of them, an 85-year-old, has detailed some of her ordeal. She said that it was a hell that she went through. She was kidnapped on motorbikes by Hamas militants, beaten with sticks, and then taken into this spider's web of tunnels that we've heard so much about, where all of the hostages were sleeping on mattresses on the floor. It sounds like an absolutely horrendous situation for those hostages. Now, it's unclear why those hostages were released. Obviously, Hamas is saying it's for humanitarian reasons. Very hard to believe that those motivations are so pure. One reason could be, obviously, Hamas and Qatar have an interest in drip feeding these hostages to keep the hope alive for all of the countries that have skin in the game, that have hostages still in Gaza. And as long as those hostages, there's any hope that they might be released, they will be lobbying for a delay of a ground invasion that obviously Israel has been touting and saying that it's planning.
Meanwhile, the UN says Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have intensified threefold compared to previous days. What can you tell us about the areas that have been targeted in the past 24 hours?
Well, most of them are in, obviously, the north and central Gaza. Most people had fled south on the advice of Israel as it was launching those attacks. But it's very hard to get information about targets and which targets have been hit in particular. There's lots of conflicting information. Hamas has said that it was mostly residential areas and inhabited homes that have been hit, while Israel says, the IDF says, that they hit 400 military targets overnight, including one of those tunnels and also some Hamas command centres inside a mosque, and they also say that they killed Hamas terrorists. But as I mentioned, very hard to get the facts. This is not just a war, a physical war, this is an information war.
Well, the UN is calling for an immediate ceasefire and for all hostages to be returned to their families. What hope is there of this?
Look, I would say there's almost no hope of that. Obviously, as I mentioned, the release of these hostages, this drip feeding of hostages, could be a tactic by Hamas and its backer Qatar to delay any kind of action on the ground and to stop those airstrikes to protect the hostages. But I think there are so many people, so many nations that now have called for a ceasefire that I think any hope of that is fading.
Lauren, the French president is in Israel for talks with leaders there. What do you think can be achieved?
That's right. Emmanuel Macron is just the latest in a string of high-profile leaders. Obviously, Joe Biden was here earlier in the week, and then Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, yesterday. And they've all had a very similar motivation, a very similar target. They're wanting a humanitarian corridor opened, and they're also wanting the release of these hostages. Emmanuel Macron spoke about the 30 French nationals who were killed on the October 7 attacks, and also the 9 French nationals who have either been taken hostage or are still missing. So he said that France mourns with Israel because it also has lost so much in these last 2 weeks. He met with some of the victims' families. And of course, he spoke about the need to prevent this conflict from becoming a broader regional conflict. That's in no one's interest if more regional players are dragged in.
What's the state of aid distribution in Gaza at the moment? The UN's warning that fuel will run out within the next 2 days.
That's right. It's absolutely dire. There was a third convoy of aid trucks that came through overnight, but it's nowhere near enough. It's a mere trickle. And fuel is so crucial, particularly for medical services. Apparently, there are something like 120 premature babies who are on incubators. And if that fuel runs out, they have little to no hope of survival. We've heard some really dire stories coming out of the hospitals of supplies just running critically low. The burns units no longer have bandages, so they're using cloths and rags to wrap wounds. They're using sewing needles to stitch people up. Apparently, they've run out of water and sterilising agents, so they're buying vinegar and things like that. The crisis in Gaza is just absolutely horrendous by anyone's measure.
Lauren Day in Jerusalem, thanks for updating us.
Thank you.